Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're seeing if we can max out a few of my favourite older games using one of the weakest modern iGPUs out there, the Radeon 610M. To do that we need a test system which, thanks to Minisforum, is the MS-A2. This is a mini workstation that features a 16-core 32-thread Ryzen 9 9955HX or 7945HX depending on how you spec it. I'm going to be honest, I'm probably not the true target audience for this. I've read a few reviews that mention NAS, home labs and Proxmox, all words that don't really mean much to me. I'm a simple man, I see a PC, I want to game, even if said PC isn't intended for such purposes. The MS-A2 scraps the desktop 8700G in favour of a soldered mobile chip. This one has the top tier 9955HX along with support for up to 96 gigs of 5600 MHz memory, as well as 3 M.2 slots. I've got 32 gigs of RAM and a 1TB drive in here at the moment. I like the way the system slides out of its own enclosure for easy access. I let out a little ooh when I figured out that this is what the little push down latch at the back does. Around the outside we have dual 10 gigabit per second SFP plus LAN and 2.5G RJ45 LAN ports, USB 3.2, USB 2, USB-C and HDMI 2.1. The most interesting addition in my opinion is the PCIe X16 slot, which runs in X8 mode and allows for a low profile single slot GPU to be added. The MS-A2 comes with a 240 watt power brick, which will be fine for whatever card you choose. Just don't be like me and choose a Gigabyte RTX 3050 before measuring the available space first. I didn't think this through at all. It's too long and too fat. It seems then that we're definitely stuck with the Radeon 610M iGPU for now. Gaming may not be a priority for those looking to buy a machine like this, but it can make for a nice break after a busy day of productivity, which, by the way, this thing will make light work of. Rendering video in DaVinci Resolve is very snappy. It actually matched my power limited 125 watt 14900K. I keep it at 125 watts because of my cheap CPU cooler. Back to gaming then, and the 610M iGPU is far weaker than the 780M found inside the 8700G as part of the MS-A1. The 610M is probably the slowest Radeon 2 iGPU out there. It clocks up to 2200 MHz and has just 2 RT cores. Enable ray tracing if you dare. While most new games will be out of the question, I couldn't help but wonder how it handles a few of my favourite older titles. And not only that, but whether or not we could max out the settings. Let's start with some context. If you want to play modern games with this, then you'll probably be limited to quite low settings. Take Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 for example. Now this probably isn't going to run that well on even the best integrated graphics solutions without some heavy visual sacrifices, but with the Radeon iGPU as part of the 9955HX here, I've had to turn everything down to its respective lowest and then enable FSR 3.1 performance as well. Even then we're getting less than 20 FPS, but it's not all like that though with modern titles, because CS2 here for example will actually run quite well even at 1080p. There will be times when we hit 60 frames per second and dropping the resolution even lower, and well, you're probably going to see plus 60 FPS a lot of the time, which was actually quite surprising considering the specs of the 610M iGPU. But now I'm going to play some of my favourite older games, starting with the oldest to the newest and seeing how well they run at the absolute maximum or highest settings when using this thing. As you saw there, we had some newer games for context, but let's go back a few years now, over 2 decades in fact, to Half-Life 2. 2004, this one came out when I was just a little 10-year-old lad. I'm a 30-year-old man now. Time sure does fly. Half-Life 2 then, the highest settings with all the AA options turned right up on the 610M iGPU, 89 frames per second. Now back in the day, my granddad's PC would have struggled to run this, and he had, I think it was a Pentium 4, and a pretty decent graphics card for the time. When he retired he got like a special deal on a new PC, and it was quite the beast I think. But I don't think it would have handled Half-Life 2 with this frame rate, interestingly enough. So way over 60 frames per second here with respectable percentile lows too, 46 and 44. Let's move forward in time now to 2005 and the absolute classic that is GTA San Andreas. Now this actually came to PS2 first of all in 2004. Here with the highest settings on the 610M, it runs at 74 frames per second. The percentile lows do leave a little to be desired. There are some instances whereby we'll see some heavy dips and drops, but I'm using the absolute maximum settings here. And San Andreas can be quite demanding even on a modern lower end hardware. You might get a decent average, but you may experience a few dips and drops here and there too. It's surprising, to be honest, how demanding this can be on certain hardware, and I can never really gauge what it's going to run like until I've tested it. Some games I sort of get an inkling, I think, oh yeah, that's going to run a certain way, but this one, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Still, plus 60 FPS most of the time, to be honest. Now most of us are probably playing the remastered version of Oblivion, but jumping back into this one, and it's quite surprising to see how well it actually still holds up visually. On the Radeon 610M with the absolute highest graphics, that's everything turned way up. If you select the Ultra preset, it doesn't actually turn everything up outside of the game, you have to do it from in the game, from within the menu. And once that's done, well, we're still getting at least 60 frames per second. It's interesting to take note of the VRAM utilization as well. I don't think the game is even using a gig, to be honest, even at these settings, but despite that, it's hitting 70 FPS as an overall average. Just like in the modern release, the frame times leave a little to be desired, of course, but there's probably no way you're going to be playing the remastered version on the 610M, though that might be worth a test. Actually, this is more difficult than the remaster, I know that, unless I just set the difficulty higher here. It's been a long while since I've played it properly. Now the next one is something that quite a lot of you probably haven't played. I might have got that completely wrong, but this is Driver Parallel Lines, and if you played Driver 3 it may have put you off the franchise a little bit. I actually quite like Driver 3, but this I believe is not a sequel, but it came out afterwards on the PS2, so it's a pretty old title. 2007 I think here, with the highest settings we're looking at 72 frames per second and 1% low of 38 and a 0.1% low of 33. Now this takes place across two different timelines. You start off in the 70s here, and then I think the character goes to prison, and then you come out in like modern times, which would have been when the game was made, so like 2006, 2007. But it's actually still really fun. I got it for, I think it might have been free on Steam a while ago, or just £1 or £2, something like that. That is well worth every penny, to be fair. As you can see, running nicely here, and for a game of this age, I think it still looks good. 70s New York is looking pretty nice on the Radeon iGPU. Now we'll move on to Crysis, the original 2007 release. Now this will run at 30 frames per second, just about, but there will be some compromises to be made, and that is the resolution. First of all, we actually using 720p here. Everything's turned way up. I'm talking anti-aliasing, everything basically, apart from motion blur, which is off. Now, as with all of these games, there are probably certain sacrifices you can make or changes to the visuals you can make in order to squeeze more out of them. With Crysis here maxed out isn't something I was expecting from the 610M, so better than I thought, but still a little problematic here and there, to be expected. Thankfully, Left 4 Dead 2 allows us to bump our resolution back up to 1080p. My eyes started straining a little bit there. With, of course, the highest settings now, we're looking at plus 60 FPS from the integrated 610M graphics. We're looking at 75 as an average, and the percentile lows are pretty smooth as well. This one is generally quite easy to run here. You're going to see the iGPU pegged at 100% and hitting that 2200 MHz max clock speed most of the time. We're not consuming all that much power. Here's how the machine sounds, by the way, under load. Not the quietest of systems, but it's not overly audible either. If you had this either under a desk or let's say in another room, you probably wouldn't notice it if it's for server purposes or whatever, but right next to me when gaming, yeah, you can certainly hear it. That said, Left 4 Dead 2 max settings, where did all these come from? Wow, that is sure to affect our frame rate a little bit. They just came out of nowhere. Performance here, yeah, pretty decent. Left 4 Dead 2 2009, I believe this came out. Next up, it's the original Call of Duty Black Ops here. This is from 2010. Now, to run this at the highest settings with a smooth frame rate, we do need to drop to 900p resolution. 1080p is going to run with about 60 frames per second, but there are going to be a lot more drops below this. Here, though, it's sort of gives us a bit more headroom to work with. And having said that, the frame times are still a bit messy. I forgot how much fun I have playing this game, to be honest. I still play it occasionally. This is actually a combat training, so it's basically a bot match here, but the game is running pretty well on the 610M iGPU. Call of Duty Black Ops came out in 2010, so 15 years old now. But let's move on to another 2010 title that doesn't run so well. This is Mafia 2, and I didn't actually benchmark it properly because it started off running with 30 frames per second at 900p, but then it just started to freeze up. It did this every time. It ran at 30 plus FPS for about 2 minutes, and then it just started lagging and slowing down, going to single digits. So not really playable, unfortunately. Well, not if you want to play it any longer than 2 minutes, put it that way, which I'm sure you probably do. Next up we have Rage. Now this is going to run really well, almost 60 FPS most of the time, and the reason for that is because it uses dynamic scaling in terms of the textures and environments. From what I recall, I think there's something called mega texturing, where what you see is like one big texture and it's sort of rendered dynamically depending on the hardware you're using. I actually made a video on Rage a few years ago. I think it was called "This Game is Not Very Demanding but Also Quite Demanding," because it depends on the system that you're using. Here obviously we're using weaker hardware, and the game knows that, or the engine knows that, so it's rendering in a way that means we're targeting 60 frames per second. Up close, you're going to notice the texture work is a little blurry, but at a distance, I think everything still looks pretty good, especially for a game of this age, and it performs quite well. I used to spend hours playing this back on the PS3 all those years ago. Let's move on to Bioshock Infinite now. It does feel a little bit like cheating again, dropping the resolution, but this is still the maximum settings at 720p. I think it probably ran like that on the PS3 back in the day, 720p or close to it. I'm not sure if it was 60 FPS though. Anyway, here with the absolute highest settings, we are getting plus 30 frames per second. The exact figure will be up on screen. It's probably closer to 40 to be honest, but yeah, with the absolute highest settings at this resolution, it's looking pretty decent. Now, of course, my advice would be to drop the settings a little bit before dropping the resolution, but as I said, I wanted to stick to the max settings here. I hope it doesn't defeat the object too much by dropping the resolution to 1280 by 720 or below 1080p. Some have been 900p of course, but yeah, I think it still looks pretty decent, and 720p doesn't look too bad, at least not to me, who probably spend most of the time playing this at 720p back on the original consoles. Now I think the sort of cut-off point for this iGPU solution, or where you're going to start noticing games struggling, is sort of 2013 and beyond, at least with settings that are cranked right up. Take Tomb Raider here for example. I think it came out on PS3 and 360, but it was also a PS4 and Xbox One game I think, and that sort of crossover period into that newer generation, just as PC games were getting more demanding as well, I think that's going to be the sort of point where the 610M iGPU starts to struggle. But games before that, you're probably going to have a lot more luck in playing them and playing them smoothly. The Minisforum MS-A2, probably not the intended purpose, but of course I wanted to do something different. I like to try and do something different every time I receive one of these machines for review. And we haven't covered the 610M graphics that much, I think once in another video, so I thought it would be interesting to go back and check out how a few older titles run. I'll leave a link to this machine, of course, if you're interested, other than for reasons of trying to max out old games as well. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.